In today's video, we will talk about this sentence, which is not exactly a quote, but it is going to capture the way in which we are trying to understand ourselves, especially when we look at from a brain-centric approach of knowing who we are. So the sentence is, in chasing what is measurable, we lose what is miraculous. We will explore this sentence in 3 steps today. So the first step is we try to understand how measuring something is not the same as the experience itself. It is quite obvious, but subconsciously we have a strong tendency to give more weightage to the measurement aspect of an experience. And without getting lost in the numbers of measurement, we need to balance out the experience as well. We need to keep referring to the experience dimension more. So right now, having the experience of a human has a certain quality to it, the quality of tasting something. So if you measure, for example, if you're tasting the honey, there is a sweetness to it, there is a texture to it, you experience it, there is a raw thing to it. But when we measure on an EEG, or when we try to figure out the pattern, where is this taste emerging from? This is the way in which we are trying to understand our experience. We are trying to measure it, and we are trying to deduce a quality experience which you are having. So basically, the qualia can never be replaced by the quantity. We might map out the complete brain on how the things are moving, the patterns, the neurons are firing, but it can never truly explain who you are as a subjective experience. Another example is when you are listening to a music. The music has a power to create a particular feeling within you. We might use an fMRI and measure the movement or the activity in your brain, but it can never replace the experience itself. It might help the neuroscientist to get closer, probably, in discovering who you are or how the experience is arising, from the perspective of the numbers and measurements and pattern. But eventually there is a gap. The gap is the miracle. That measurement can never actually reflect the quality of having an experience. Another way to look at this is, so what is being measured is the electrical activity in the brain. But when these activities are happening, when you're measuring, you are seeing electricity. So does it mean you're having those mild electric shocks in your brain? So when you're tasting something, there is an experience of tasting it. And when you're measuring, there is electricity in the brain. So which is more true at that point? Are the electrical shocks happening, or you have a quality of experience? So no matter what the pattern is going to reveal, ultimately you as a subject, you have that experience. So somewhere we have lost our way, or rather we are more inclined towards the measurement rather than remembering that what started this quest was the quality. And in step 2, now we will try to understand what are the limitations of neuroscience. Of course, there is absolutely a practical aspect of studying the brain, the patterns, and there is an application to it. But there are certain limits to what neuroscience can reveal. Can it truly discover the consciousness aspect? So we have been trying to understand our experiences, the 5 sensory experiences, in terms of the NCC, or the neural correlates of consciousness. So we try to correlate an experience on how the neuron patterns are there in our brain, and we are trying to link it with an experience. Of course, it is true, but it, as I said, the qualia aspect of it, as David Chalmers, who is a philosopher and a neuroscientist, he calls this as the hard problem of consciousness. So this is a hard problem when we try to understand consciousness like it is an emergent property of matter. So if we are looking from the perspective of this, where the matter is giving rise to consciousness, or the brain is giving rise to consciousness, of course the hard problem does exist. So this is where we need to take a step back and see, does the experience come first or the theorizing or measurement comes first? If we are absolutely clear about this aspect of who we are, it's extremely easy to figure out this hard problem of consciousness. Qualia is always there and the brain is also there. Both go hand in hand. An intervention in the brain will of course affect the consciousness aspect of you. Depending on what particular area you are touching in the brain, that will affect the experience as well, no doubt. And there is something known as the connectome paradox. That is basically, even if we are still trying to map the brain activity, it's billions of neurons. So even someday, if we are able to map the complete network of the brain for each experience, that can never explain what is consciousness. You might have successfully mapped the effect of consciousness in brain, but what it means to be conscious entity can never be explained theoretically. It's always subjective. Until eternity it will remain a subjective experience, and we can never make it as a formula or pattern of brain which we have figured out. We might intervene with brain, as I've said, but that will be an application of this discovery, but it can never define what it means to be a conscious entity. So in my previous videos I have talked about the Brahman. As I say, it's just a term, a label. Here I'm specifically referring to consciousness. The manifest aspect of consciousness is brain, and the unmanifest is the pure consciousness. That is the Brahman and its creation, the Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. It's the same. Brain is a reflection of that infinite intelligence when it localizes itself. So someone like Bernardo Kastrup is one of the philosopher and a computer science engineer who talks in terms of the whirlpool which you have in the stream of a river. That whirlpool is individual beings, like each of us is one of those rotations in this consciousness. It's an analogy. And also Rupert Spira. And it's an intuition. You can clearly feel the body and mind is nothing but this localization of that infinite being, which doesn't have a shape if it truly wants to experience, because infinity can never have a shape or a form. It can have the potential. Just to speak in few words, I can say it has a potential. But to truly even say this word, it needs to localize itself on a given point. And then the biology we call, the gene expressions we talk about, all of this has this causality when they manifest, and that is what we are trying to study. And it is true, the biology, the chemistry, the physics, all of this are the ways through which the infinity manifests itself. When we, as this limited intelligent being, tries to study the behavior, it is objectively true throughout the universe. So the point being, brain or you are a reflection. You are the other side of the coin, or the pure consciousness. Now we can make use of our brain or the intelligence, the limited intelligence, to try to understand the objective world which we experience, the phenomenal world which we experience. We can make use of our intelligence to study that. But the same brain cannot study itself, or what we can say as the mind trying to understand what is mind. There is a limitations to it. We can go to certain point on inquiring into who we are. Somewhere in the dualistic way of investigating who we are, we try to understand ourselves from the brain. That is, as I mentioned, the emergent phenomenon, consciousness to be something which is a result of the alignment of certain things in a certain manner, and we have brain and it gives us to consciousness. Now that way of approach has limitations. Take a pause and see this limitation. We can never inquire into who we are through this causal link. It's an infinite regression. You keep on asking the question. Ultimately there comes a point where you have to give up with the logical answer. The logic is only true for the manifest. The unmanifest is the source of logic, and it itself does not need a logic to exist. Our mind, our ego needs, because that is what we are used to as humans, especially in this timeline of society. And in step 3, we talk about going beyond measurements to the direct experience itself. So, our thoughts, our body, the motion we have, studying the neurons, the muscles, all this objective way of trying to know ourselves are true, as I mentioned. But that silent, aware space in which all of these measurements are done, that cannot be measured by itself. But it is undeniable. Consciousness is the only undeniable aspect of who you are, and we can discover this without logic. And it gives a sense of freedom. You are no more craving, you are no more desperate to find answers in the world outside. The answer of who you are is already embedded in you. And in my book, Activating the Non-Dual Codex, this is what I talk about. It's already within you. The codex to awaken is already within you. Another analogy which can give you an idea of what I'm talking about or what this sentence is about is, so the planet has different terrains. We have vast lands, mountains, and oceans. There is a landscape to this planet. And we as humans, we have made a map for convenience. A map is helpful to navigate that terrain. So yes, we can have the map as well, but we should not forget what comes first is that land, that raw planet which does not have any lines. Or specifically for this particular sentence, there is labels which we use to understand the behavior which is reflected in our brain, but the experience, which is quite miraculous, the consciousness seems to be the most miraculous thing if you truly try to experience it as it is, without clouding yourself with all the concepts, which might be true as I've said, but that is an extension or just a representation of the qualia. Do not forget the qualia. I have to say this, awakening is nothing but realizing this primacy of your being, which is quality itself, which comes first. Do not reduce yourselves to the numbers, the measurements alone. It might be reflective of something which can be relevant to your story, but that is definitely not who you are. You are the immeasurable miracle. Thank you for watching today's video.